The moment your head touches the pillow tonight, you will enter the most creative state known to humanity. Not when you're awake, struggling and striving in the world of appearances, not when you're planning and plotting your next move, but when you surrender to sleep, when consciousness softly withdraws from the outer world and turns inward to that sacred space where all things are possible. In this twilight realm between waking and sleeping, something extraordinary occurs. The rational mind, with all its doubts and limitations, begins to dissolve. The barriers between what is and what could be start to fade. And in that precious moment, that liminal space where consciousness hovers between two worlds, you possess the power to plant the seeds of your future reality. Most people sleep to rest. They close their eyes to escape the world, to find temporary refuge from their troubles. But what if sleep was never meant to be an escape? What if it was designed to be the very portal through which you reshape the world itself? What if the 8 hours you spend in apparent unconsciousness are actually the most conscious, most creative hours of your entire day? The ancient mystics understood this. They knew that when the outer senses withdraw, when the chatter of the conscious mind grows quiet, consciousness itself becomes like clay in the hands of a master sculptor, malleable, responsive, ready to be shaped by the feeling of your deepest desires already fulfilled. This is the sleeper's paradox. The state that appears most passive is actually the most active. The condition that seems most unconscious is actually supremely conscious. While your body lies still, your consciousness can travel to any state, assume any condition, experience any reality as though it were already true. But here's what makes this paradox even more mysterious. The feelings you cultivate in that drowsy state, the assumptions you make about yourself and your world as you drift off to sleep, don't remain in the realm of dreams. They begin to externalize. They start to harden into facts. The invisible becomes visible. The imagined becomes real. Reality, as if obeying some cosmic law, begins to rearrange itself to match the pattern you've impressed upon it. You see, consciousness is not produced by the brain, as materialists would have you believe. Consciousness is the very substance of reality itself. It's the clay from which all things are molded. And when you learn to direct consciousness deliberately, when you learn to feel your way into the reality you desire, you're not just daydreaming, you're not just fantasizing, you're actually creating. The world you wake up to tomorrow is being shaped by the consciousness you carry into sleep tonight. The relationships you'll experience, the opportunities that will present themselves, the very circumstances of your life, all of these are responding to the deep assumptions you hold about yourself and your world. Your outer life is nothing more than a reflection of your inner convictions, a mirror of your most persistent feelings about what is true for you. This is why the wise have always said that man is asleep. Entertainment often glamorizes struggle and suffering, while presenting success as either impossible or corrupting. Social media creates endless opportunities for comparison, ensuring you always find someone who seems to have more than you do. It promotes the illusion that everyone else is living perfect lives while you're struggling with problems. It encourages you to seek validation from others rather than finding confidence within yourself. Educational systems teach you to compete rather than collaborate, to fear failure rather than learn from it, to follow instructions rather than think independently. They reward conformity and punish creativity, training you to see yourself as a cog in a machine rather than a unique expression of infinite consciousness. Religious institutions often promote the idea that you're inherently flawed, that you need salvation from external sources, that you should be humble about your desires rather than bold in your assumptions. They encourage you to pray for change rather than assume change, to hope for blessings rather than expect miracles, to accept suffering as God's will rather than create joy as your birthright. But here's the liberating truth. All propaganda relies on your consent. It only works because you accept its messages as true. The moment you withdraw your consent, the moment you choose to assume something different, the propaganda loses its power over you. You are not a victim of conditioning. You are the one who gives that conditioning its power through your assumptions. This is why recognizing the propaganda of limitation is the first step toward freedom. You must become aware of the messages you're accepting, the assumptions you're adopting, the limitations you're assuming to be true. You must question everything you've been taught about your own power and possibilities. When you realize that most of your limitations, not facts but assumptions, that most of your problems are not permanent but changeable, that most of your circumstances are not fixed but responsive to consciousness, you begin to see through the propaganda that has shaped your experience. You begin to recognize that you have been living far below your actual potential, accepting far less than you could create. The systems that benefit from your limitation will not teach you about your power. They will not inform you that assumption creates reality, that consciousness shapes experience, that imagination is the creative force of the universe. You must discover these truths for yourself through your own experience and experimentation. This discovery is not just personal, it's revolutionary. When enough people recognize their own creative power, when enough individuals refuse to accept the propaganda of limitation, the entire structure of human society must change. Systems based on disempowerment cannot survive when people remember their own empowerment. The moment you recognize the propaganda of limitation for what it is, something within you begins to stir. A remembrance starts to awaken. You begin to recall what you have always known but somehow forgot, that you are not a powerless victim of circumstances, but the very power that creates circumstances. You are not separate from the creative force of the universe. You are that force, individualized and expressing itself through your unique consciousness. This awakening doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds gradually, like dawn breaking over a landscape that has been shrouded in darkness. First comes the recognition that your current reality is not fixed, not permanent, not the final word on what's possible for you. Then comes the understanding that your consciousness is creative, that your assumptions shape your experience, that your imagination is the workshop where your future is being constructed. With this understanding comes both tremendous freedom and tremendous responsibility. Freedom because you realize that no external condition has the power to limit you unless you accept that limitation. Responsibility because you recognize that you are the author of your own experience, the creator of your own reality, the God of your own world. This awakening requires courage. It's far easier to believe that you're at the mercy of external forces than to accept that you are the force that shapes your experience. It's more comfortable to blame circumstances for your limitations than to recognize that those circumstances are the externalization of your own assumptions. It's simpler to hope that someone else will change your life than to realize that you must change your consciousness. But once you truly grasp that consciousness is the only reality, that assumption creates experience, that imagination is the creative power of God operating through you, there is no going back. You cannot unknow what you have come to know. You cannot return to unconsciousness once you have tasted true awareness. The great awa kenning begins with a simple recognition. I am, not I am this or I am that, but simply I am. The fundamental awareness that you exist, that you are conscious, that you are alive. This I am is not your name, your profession, your history, or your circumstances. It is the pure consciousness that experiences all these things without being limited by any of them. When you rest in this I am awareness, when you feel yourself as pure consciousness rather than as the contents of consciousness, you discover that you are infinitely creative. You realize that you can assume any state, experience any condition, embody any identity. The I am that you are is like a chameleon that can take on any color, like an actor who can play any role, like an artist who can create any masterpiece. This is your true identity, not the limited person you've learned to believe yourself to be, but the unlimited consciousness that is capable of being anyone, having anything, experiencing everything. You are not John or Mary, you are not your job or your bank account, you are not your past or your problems. You are the I am presence that can assume any of these identities without being confined by any of them. The practice of conscious creation begins with learning to feel yourself into the states you desire. Instead of trying to figure out how your desires will be fulfilled, you assume they already are fulfilled. Instead of focusing on present limitations, you live in the feeling of future accomplishment. Instead of being what you are, you dare to be what you want to be. This is not pretending or wishful thinking. This is the deliberate direction of consciousness toward desired states. When you assume a state of consciousness, when you feel yourself into a new identity, when you live in the end of your desire fulfilled, you are actually changing the fundamental frequency of your being. You are tuning yourself to a different reality, aligning with a different set of possibilities. The feeling is the secret, not the thinking, not the planning, not the working, but the feeling of already having what you want, already being who you wish to become, already living the life you desire. This feeling must be cultivated in imagination until it becomes natural, until it feels more real than your present circumstances. Every night as you prepare for sleep, you have the opportunity to practice this conscious creation. In that drowsy state between waking and sleeping, when the rational mind relaxes its grip and consciousness becomes fluid and responsive, you can assume any state you choose. You can feel yourself into your desired reality and allow that feeling to carry you into sleep. As you lie in bed, instead of reviewing the problems of the day or worrying about tomorrow's challenges, enter into the feeling of your wish fulfilled. If you desire wealth, feel the security and freedom that wealth would bring. If you want love, feel yourself as deeply loved and cherished. If you seek health, Feel the vitality and strength of perfect well-being. The key is to make these feelings so vivid, so compelling, so emotionally satisfying that they feel more real than your present circumstances. You must convince your consciousness that what you're imagining is actually happening. You must feel it so intensely that your entire being accepts it as true. This is not always easy. Your rational mind will protest that you're just daydreaming. Your present circumstances will seem to contradict your assumption. Other people may try to convince you that you're being unrealistic. But you must persist in your assumption regardless of appearances, regardless of criticism, regardless of doubt. The time it takes for your assumption to externalize as fact depends on the intensity of your feeling and the persistence of your assumption. Some states manifest quickly within days or weeks. Others may take months or even years to fully externalize. But if you maintain your assumption, if you continue to feel yourself in your desired state, if you persist in living in the end regardless of appearances, your assumption must become fact. This is not a matter of faith or belief, but of understanding how consciousness works. Consciousness is creative. It cannot help but externalize the states you assume to be true. Your outer world is simply your inner world made visible. Change your inner world, and your outer world must change to match it. The process requires patience, persistence, and faith in the creative power of your own consciousness. You must learn to live by assumption rather than by sight, to be guided by vision rather than by current conditions, to trust in the unseen rather than be discouraged by the seen. But as you practice this conscious creation, as you learn to assume states and watch them externalize, as you discover the creative power of your own imagination, something wonderful happens. You begin to feel like the God you actually are. You start to experience the joy and freedom that comes from knowing you can create any reality you choose. You realize that there are no limitations except the ones you accept, no impossibilities except the ones you assume, no problems except the ones you continue to create through unconscious assumption. You discover that you live in a universe that is infinitely responsive to your consciousness, endlessly creative, constantly reflecting back to you the states you choose to embody. This is the Great Awakening. The recognition that you are not a human being having spiritual experiences, but a spiritual being having human experiences. You are not limited by the body you wear or the circumstances you currently experience. You are the unlimited consciousness that creates bodies and circumstances, the infinite I am that can assume any identity and experience any reality. When enough people awaken to this truth, when enough individuals recognize their own creative power, when enough consciousness is directed toward love rather than fear, abundance rather than scarcity, unity rather than separation, the world itself will be transformed. The new earth that prophets have spoken of is not a physical location, but a collective state of consciousness, a reality where humans live as the gods they actually are. This transformation begins with you. It starts with your willingness to assume responsibility for your own experience, to recognize your own creative power, to dare to imagine and feel yourself into the reality you truly desire. It begins the moment you stop living as a victim and start living as a creator, stop accepting limitation and start assuming possibility, stop hoping for change and start being the change. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, you stand at the threshold of infinite possibility. In that sacred space between waking and sleeping, you can plant the seeds of any future you choose. You can assume any state, feel any condition, experience any reality as already true. And if you persist in that assumption, if you fall asleep in the feeling of your wish fulfilled, you will discover that reality rushes to meet you, eager to reflect back the consciousness you have assumed. This is your birthright, your natural inheritance as a conscious being. You are not here to suffer or struggle or accept less than you desire. You are here to create, to experience, to express the infinite possibilities of consciousness through your unique perspective. You are here to be the God you actually are, to live the life you truly want, to manifest the reality that brings you joy. The Great Awakening is not something that will happen to you. It is something that happens through you, as you, when you recognize and accept the creative power that has always been yours. The kingdom of heaven is not a place you go to, but a state of consciousness you enter. And you can enter it now simply by assuming it to be true, by feeling yourself there, by daring to be what you have always been but temporarily forgot. Fall asleep tonight in the assumption of your wish fulfilled, and watch as reality rushes to meet you, eager to confirm what consciousness has decreed. This is the promise, this is the power, this is the truth that sets you free. You are the operant power in your world, and assumption is the way that power operates. And so we arrive at the end of our journey together. though in truth every ending is but a new beginning. What we have explored is not mere philosophy or abstract theory, but the fundamental mechanics of existence itself. You have been given the keys to the kingdom, not some distant heavenly realm, but the kingdom of consciousness that exists within you right now. The sleeper's paradox with which we began reveals itself now as the ultimate truth. The moment of apparent powerlessness is actually the moment of supreme power. When you surrender to sleep tonight, you are not retreating from reality. You are entering the very workshop where reality is created. In that sacred space between waking and sleeping, you have the opportunity to plant the seeds of tomorrow's harvest. But let us be clear about what has been revealed. This is not a teaching about positive thinking or visualization techniques. This is not another self-help method or manifestation strategy. What we have uncovered is the very nature of consciousness, I, to self, the recognition that you are not a separate being trying to influence an external world, but the very consciousness that is appearing as both the perceiver and the perceived. The man who discovered these truths did not invent them. He simply recognized what has always been true, that imagination is the creative power of God, that assumption hardens into fact, that consciousness is the only reality. These are not beliefs to be adopted, but facts to be experienced. They are not theories to be understood intellectually, but principles to be lived experientially. Your imagination is not a faculty separate from the divine creative power. It is that power individualized and made available to you. When you imagine, you are not creating mental pictures disconnected from reality. You are literally exercising the same creative force that spoke the universe into existence. The difference between divine creation and human imagination is not a difference in kind, but only in degree of realization. The architecture of assumption operates whether you are conscious of it or not. You are assuming states of consciousness every moment of every day. The question is not whether you will assume, but what you will assume. Will you assume limitation or possibility? Will you assume lack or abundance? Will you assume powerlessness or creative authority? These are not philosophical questions. They are practical choices that determine the very fabric of your experience. The theater of your mind is already in operation. Scenes are playing out on the stage of your consciousness right now. The question is whether you will direct these scenes consciously or allow them to unfold randomly. Will you be a deliberate playwright creating the drama of your choosing, or will you be a passive audience member watching whatever happens to appear on the screen of your awareness? The quantum bridge between consciousness and reality is not a metaphor. It is a literal description of how your world operates. Every moment of observation is an act of creation. Every assumption you make collapses infinite possibilities into specific experiences. You are not witnessing a predetermined reality. You are participating in the ongoing creation of reality itself. The propaganda of limitation that surrounds you is powerful, but it is not stronger than the truth within you. Every system that seeks to convince you of your powerlessness depends on your ignorance of your actual power. The moment you recognize your creative authority, the moment you understand that assumption creates reality, these systems lose their hold over you. You cannot be enslaved by those who depend on your unconsciousness once you have awakened to your true nature. The Great Awakening is not a future event to be anticipated, but a present reality to be embraced. You do not need to wait for enlightenment to arrive. You need only recognize the consciousness that is already present. You do not need to become something other than what you are. You need only remember what you have always been. But remember, this knowledge comes with responsibility. You cannot claim to be a victim of circumstances once you understand that you are the creator of circumstances. You cannot blame others for your limitations once you realize that your limitations are self-imposed. You cannot wait for the world to change once you understand that you are the one who changes the world through your consciousness. This is not a burden, it is a liberation. To know that you are the operant power in your world is to know that no condition is permanent, no situation is hopeless, no desire is impossible. Whatever you can imagine, you can experience. Whatever you can assume, you can become. Whatever you can feel as real, you can manifest as fact. The practice is simple, though not always easy. You must learn to live in the end, to assume the feeling of your wish already fulfilled, rather than hoping it will be fulfilled in the future. You must dare to be what you want to be, rather than remaining what you appear to be. You must feel yourself into new states of consciousness and allow those states to become your reality. This requires faith, but not blind faith. It requires the faith that comes from understanding, the recognition that consciousness is creative, that assumption hardens into fact, that feeling is the secret of all manifestation. It requires the faith to persist in your assumption even when appearances seem to contradict it, even when others doubt you, even when your rational mind protests. The time it takes for your assumptions to externalize varies, but the principle never fails. Some states manifest quickly, others more slowly, but every assumption persisted in must eventually become fact. This is not a promise, it is a law as reliable as gravity, as dependable as the rotation of the earth. You are not asked to believe this truth, you are invited to test it. Take any desire, any state you wish to experience, any condition you want to manifest. Assume it is already yours. Feel yourself into that state. Maintain that assumption regardless of appearances. Persist in that feeling until it becomes natural. Then watch as your world rearranges itself to confirm what your consciousness has decreed. Do not look for signs or ask for proof. Do not doubt because things seem to be taking time. Do not waver because others question your assumptions. Simply persist in the feeling of your wish fulfilled, knowing that what you have assumed in consciousness must appear in experience. The greatest discovery you can make is not that the world is friendly or unfriendly, but that the world is responsive. It mirrors your consciousness perfectly. It reflects your assumptions faithfully. It externalizes your states of consciousness without judgment or exception. You live in a universe that says yes to whatever you truly believe about yourself and your possibilities. This is why the mystics have always taught that the kingdom of heaven is within you. They were not speaking of some future reward, but of a present reality. The kingdom of heaven is the recognition that you are consciousness itself, that you are the creative power of the universe individualized, that you are the very I am that creates all experience. And you truly understand this when you really grasp that you are not in the world, but the world is in you. When you realize that you are not experiencing consciousness, but are consciousness experiencing itself, everything changes. Fear dissolves because you know that you are the power that creates and dissolves all conditions. Limitation disappears because you understand that you are unlimited consciousness, temporarily playing at being limited. Tonight, when you lay your head upon your pillow, remember what you have learned. Remember that you are not going to sleep, you are entering the creative state. Remember that you are not escaping reality, you are accessing the realm where reality is created. Remember that you have the power to assume any state, to feel any condition, to experience any reality as already true. Fall asleep in the assumption of your wish fulfilled. Feel yourself into the state you desire. Experience the reality you prefer as though it were already manifest. And then surrender to sleep with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have set in motion forces that must by their very nature externalize your assumption. This is not hope, it is certainty. This is not faith, it is knowledge. This is not belief, it is understanding. You are the operant power in your world. Assumption is the way that power operates. Feeling is the secret that makes it work. The kingdom of heaven is yours for the assuming. The life of your dreams is yours for the feeling. The reality you desire is yours for the accepting. You need not earn it, deserve it, or work for it. You need only assume it, feel it, and allow it to be. You are not a human being learning to be spiritual. You are a spiritual being learning to be human. You are not a limited creature seeking to transcend limitation. You are unlimited consciousness choosing to experience itself through the lens of individuality. You are not trying to become God. You are God pretending to be otherwise. The pretense is over. The game of limitation has been played long enough. The time has come to remember who you really are and to live from that recognition. You are the I am that creates all experience. You are the consciousness that observes and thereby creates reality. You are the imagination that conceives and thereby manifests all possibilities. This is your truth. This is your power. This is your birthright. Use it wisely. Use it lovingly. Use it for the good of all. But above all, use it, for you are here not to suffer, but to create, not to struggle, but to manifest, not to hope, but to experience the infinite possibilities of consciousness itself. The sleeper awakens, the dreamer becomes lucid, the God remembers, and reality, eager to reflect this new understanding, rushes to meet you exactly as you have assumed it to be. This is the end of our journey together, but it is the beginning of your journey home. Home to the recognition of your own creative power, home to the understanding of your divine nature, home to the experience of being the very consciousness that creates and sustains all worlds. Go now and assume the best. Feel it, live it, be it, and watch it. So the world confirms what you have dared to believe about yourself. You are the operant power. You are the creative force. You are the I am that I am. And so it is. Not because he literally sleeps, but because he remains unconscious of his own creative power. He drifts through life, reacting to circumstances, never realizing that he is the author of those very circumstances. He experiences himself as a victim of forces beyond his control, never recognizing that he is the force that controls all forces in his individual world. The sleeper's paradox reveals the great secret. You are never really asleep. Even in your deepest slumber, consciousness continues. Even when the outer world fades away, awareness remains. And in that state of pure awareness, freed from the limitations of the physical senses, you can assume any state, feel any condition, experience any reality as completely real. When you truly understand this, sleep becomes something sacred. It becomes your laboratory, your workshop, your creative studio. It becomes the place where you commune with the infinite possibilities of your own consciousness and select which ones you will experience as reality. The question then becomes, what are you creating in that sacred space? What feelings are you cultivating as you drift off to sleep? What assumptions about yourself and your world are you allowing to take root in the fertile soil of your subconscious mind? Most people carry their problems to bed with them. They replay their worries, rehearse their fears, and drift off while feeling the weight of their current limitations. And then they wonder why tomorrow looks so much like today, why their lives seem stuck in patterns of lack and struggle. But when you understand the sleeper's paradox, you realize that every night offers a fresh opportunity. Every journey into sleep is a chance to plant new seeds, to assume new states, to feel your way into the reality you truly desire. You begin to see sleep not as an escape from life, but as the very means by which life is transformed. As you prepare for sleep, you stand at the threshold of infinite possibility. In that drowsy state, you can assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled. You can experience yourself as already possessing what you desire, already being who you long to become. And if you can maintain that feeling, if you can fall asleep in the assumption that your desire is already real, then you will have set in motion forces that must, by the very nature of consciousness itself, externalize your assumption. This is the sleeper's paradox. The most powerful creative act you can perform happens when you appear to be doing nothing at all. The secret of transformation lies not in action, but in assumption, not in doing, but in being, not in trying to change the world, but in changing the feeling of yourself and letting the world conform to that new feeling. The mystics of old understood this truth. They knew that he who would transform his world must first transform his consciousness. They knew that feeling is the secret, not thinking, not planning, not struggling, but feeling. Feeling yourself into the state you desire, and then allowing that feeling to become your reality. There once lived a man who grasped this truth so completely that he spent his life teaching others to recognize their own creative power. He understood that every human being is an individualized expression of the same infinite consciousness that creates and sustains the universe. He knew that what we call God is not separate from us, but is the very I am that we feel ourselves to be. This man wasn't born into privilege or power. He began his adult life as a dancer, moving through the world of entertainment and performance. But something happened to him. A shift in consciousness so profound that it changed not only his own life, but the lives of countless others who would later discover his teachings. He came to understand that imagination is not merely the ability to picture things in the mind. Imagination is the very creative power of God operating in and through human consciousness. When you imagine something, you're not just creating mental pictures. You're actually exercising the same power that spoke the world into existence. This revelation didn't come to him through books or teachers, though he was well read in the mystical traditions. It came through direct experience, through the practice of assuming states of consciousness and witnessing how reality would rearrange itself to match those assumptions. He discovered that consciousness is the only reality and that the world of appearances is simply consciousness made visible. What made his understanding unique was its practical nature. He didn't speak in abstract philosophical terms or wrap his teachings in complex religious doctrine. He spoke simply and directly about the mechanics of creation, about how any person could use their imagination to transform their life. He taught that the same power that creates galaxies and governs the movement of planets is available to every individual, ready to be used for the fulfillment of any desire. His message was revolutionary precisely because it was so simple. He taught that you don't need to be worthy before you can create. You don't need to earn the right to use your imagination. You don't need to petition some external deity or follow elaborate rituals. You simply need to recognize that the creative power of the universe is your own consciousness. and that by changing your consciousness, you change your world. He would often say that states of consciousness are the only reality. What you call your life, your circumstances, your relationships, these are simply the externalization of your habitual states of consciousness. Change the state and the circumstances must change. Assume a new state and watch as your world transforms to match that assumption. This understanding came to him through years of testing and proving. He would assume different states of consciousness and observe how his outer world would change to confirm those assumptions. He discovered that consciousness is not passive but creative. It's not just aware, it's actively creating the reality it observes. He learned to live in the end. Instead of trying to figure out how his desires would be fulfilled, he would assume they already were fulfilled. He would feel himself into the state of having what he wanted, being who he wished to be, experiencing the reality he preferred. And time and again he would watch as circumstances would arrange themselves to make his assumptions true. The power of this approach lies in its recognition of a fundamental truth. Assumption hardens into fact. What you assume to be true about yourself and your world becomes true, not because of any external force, but because consciousness itself is the creative principle of the universe. When you assume a state of consciousness, you're not just thinking differently, you're actually entering a different reality. This is why he taught that feeling is the secret, not the feeling of wanting something, but the feeling of having it, not the feeling of hoping for change, but the feeling of being changed, the feeling of the wish fulfilled, maintained, and persisted in until it becomes natural and automatic. He understood that most people live their lives backwards. They wait for circumstances to change before they'll change their feelings. They say, when I get the money, then I'll feel wealthy. When I find love, then I'll feel lovable. When I achieve success, then I'll feel successful. But he taught the opposite. Assume the feeling first, and the circumstances must follow. This is the architecture of assumption, the invisible structure that underlies all manifestation. Every fact in your life is the result of an assumption you've made about yourself or your world. Every condition you experience is the externalization of a state of consciousness you've assumed to be true. The extraordinary thing about assumptions is that they operate below the threshold of conscious awareness. You're not usually conscious of assuming. You simply accept certain things as true, and those assumptions become the lens through which you perceive and experience reality. Become the foundation upon which your entire life is built. Most people inherit their assumptions from their culture, their family, their education, their past experiences. They assume that life is hard, that money is scarce, that love is difficult to find, that success requires struggle. These assumptions feel natural and inevitable, but they're actually choices that can be changed at any moment. When you begin to recognize the assumptions that govern your life, you discover that you're not a victim of circumstances. You're the creator of circumstances. Every condition in your life is there because you've assumed it to be true. Every limitation you experience is the result of a limiting assumption you've accepted. But here's the liberating truth. Assumptions can be changed. At any moment, you can choose to assume something different about yourself or your world. You can assume that you're wealthy, that you're loved, that you're successful, that you're healthy. And if you can maintain that assumption, if you can feel it as true, then it must become true in your experience. This is not positive thinking or wishful thinking. This is the recognition of a fundamental law of consciousness. Assumption creates reality. What you assume to be true about yourself becomes true. What you assume to be possible becomes possible. What you assume to be inevitable becomes inevitable. The architecture of assumption operates through feeling. When you assume something to be true, you feel it to be true. That feeling becomes a state of consciousness, and that state of consciousness becomes your reality. The feeling is the bridge between the invisible assumption and the visible fact. This is why you must learn to feel your way into the states you desire. You must learn to assume the feeling of already being what you want to be, already having what you want to have. You must learn to live in the end, to feel yourself into the reality you prefer, and to maintain that feeling until it becomes natural and automatic. The world you see around you is not fixed and unchangeable. It's the solidified result of assumptions that have been maintained over time. Change the assumptions, and the world must change. Assume new states of consciousness and watch as your reality transforms to match those states. This is the great secret that runs through all the mystical traditions. Consciousness is the only reality, and assumption is the way consciousness creates experience. When you truly understand this, you realize that you're not at the mercy of external forces. You're the creative power of the universe, individualized and made manifest in human form. Your mind is a theater. Not metaphorically, but literally. Right now, as you process these words, scenes are playing out on the stage of your consciousness. Memories from yesterday dance with possibilities for tomorrow. Conversations that never happened feel as real as those that did. In this inner theater, you are simultaneously the playwright, the director, the entire cast, and the audience. But here's what most people never realize. The performances taking place in this theater of your mind don't stay confined to the stage of imagination. They spill out into the world. The scenes you repeatedly play in your consciousness become the script for your outer life. The roles you consistently rehearse in imagination become the characters you embody in reality. Every night as you drift off to sleep, the curtain rises on the most important performance of your day. In that drowsy state, when the rational mind relaxes its grip and the senses withdraw from the outer world, your imagination takes center stage. The scenes you allow to play out, the roles you choose to embody, the feelings you permit to flood through you, these become the blueprint for tomorrow's reality. The theater of your mind operates by laws as precise as those governing the physical world, yet infinitely more responsive to your will. In this inner realm, time is fluid. Past, present, and future exist simultaneously, and you can step into any moment, any possibility, any version of yourself with complete freedom. Distance means nothing here. You can be anywhere with anyone, experiencing anything you choose to experience. Most people use this magnificent theater unconsciously. They replay scenes of worry and limitation. They rehearse conversations where they defend themselves or justify their circumstances. They project futures filled with the same problems they're experiencing today. And then they wonder why their outer life feels so repetitive, so predictable, so confined. But when you understand that your imagination is not just a faculty for entertainment or escape, but the very workshop where your future is being constructed, everything changes. You begin to treat your inner theater with the reverence it deserves. You become selective about which scenes you'll allow to play out, which roles you'll rehearse, which feelings you'll cultivate. In this theater, you can assume any identity. You can experience yourself as wealthy, as loved, as successful, as healthy. You can feel what it would be like to live in your dream home, to have the relationship you desire, to possess the skills and abilities you admire. And here's the crucial point. Your consciousness cannot distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a so-called real one. To consciousness, feeling is reality. When you consistently rehearse scenes of fulfillment in your imagination, when you repeatedly experience yourself as already possessing what you desire, something remarkable happens. Your consciousness begins to accept these imagined experiences as true. The feeling of having becomes more familiar than the feeling of lacking. The assumption of fulfillment becomes stronger than the assumption of limitation. This is not make-believe. This is not self-deception. This is the deliberate use of imagination to create new neural pathways, new patterns of thinking and feeling, new states of consciousness that must, by the very nature of consciousness itself, externalize as corresponding experiences in your outer world. The scenes you play out in imagination become the templates for future experience, the feelings you cue. Litivate in your inner theater become the magnetic force that draws corresponding circumstances into your life. The roles you consistently embody in consciousness become the person you actually are in the world. Think of a method actor preparing for a role. They don't just memorize lines, they become the character. They think as the character thinks, feel as the character feels, move through the world as the character would move. By the time they step onto the physical stage, the transformation is complete. They are no longer pretending to be someone else. They have actually become someone else. In the theater of your mind, you have the opportunity to become anyone you choose to be. You can rehearse being confident, being loved, being prosperous, being healthy. You can practice the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of the person you wish to become. And if you commit to this rehearsal, if you make it a consistent practice, you will discover that the line between imagination and reality begins to blur. The key is persistence and feeling. You must not only see yourself in your desired state, but feel yourself there. You must experience the relief, the joy, the satisfaction of having what you want. You must make the imagined experience so vivid, so emotionally compelling, that it feels more real than your present circumstances. This requires discipline, not the discipline of struggle and effort, but the discipline of attention and feeling. You must learn to direct your attention away from unwanted conditions and toward desired states. You must train yourself to feel grateful for what hasn't yet appeared, to feel confident in abilities you haven't yet developed, to feel loved even when you're alone. In your inner theater, rehearsal becomes reality. What you consistently imagine, you inevitably experience. What you repeatedly feel, you ultimately become. The person you are tomorrow is being shaped by the performances taking place in your consciousness today. The same principles that govern your individual theater of consciousness operate on a universal scale. Modern science has begun to discover what mystics have always known. Consciousness and reality are intimately connected. The observer and the observed are not separate entities, but two aspects of a single unified field of awareness. Quantum physics has revealed that the very act of observation affects the behavior of subatomic particles. Before measurement, particles exist in a state of infinite possibility described by what scientists call a wave function. But the moment consciousness observes them, this wave function collapses and the particles take on specific properties and positions. This observer effect suggests something extraordinary. Consciousness doesn't just perceive reality, it participates in creating it. The universe exists in a state of infinite potential until consciousness collapses that potential into specific experience. Every moment of observation is an act of creation, a selection from the infinite field of possibility. What quantum physics describes at the subatomic level mirrors what you experience in your daily life. Your consciousness is constantly collapsing possibilities into actualities. Your assumptions, expectations, and beliefs act as observation, determining which potentials become real in your experience. You are not a passive observer of reality, you are an active participant in its creation. The double-slit experiment demonstrates this principle beautifully. When scientists fire particles at a screen with two slits, the particles behave differently depending on whether they're being observed. When unobserved, they behave like waves, passing through both slits simultaneously and creating an interference pattern. But when observed, they behave like particles, going through one slit or the other. Your consciousness works in a similar way. When you're not paying attention to a particular aspect of your life, it exists in a state of multiple possibilities. But the moment you focus your attention, the moment you form an assumption or expectation, you collapse those possibilities into a specific experience. This is why your assumptions are so powerful. They act as a kind of quantum observation, selecting which possibilities become real in your life. When you assume you're unsuccessful, you collapse the wave function of your potential into experiences of failure. When you assume you're loved, you select realities where love is present. When you assume you're wealthy, you draw forth circumstances that reflect abundance. The quantum field responds to consciousness not through some mystical process, but through the fundamental nature of reality itself. Consciousness and matter are not separate substances, but different aspects of a single underlying reality. What we call the physical world is simply consciousness taking on form, awareness manifesting as experience. This understanding bridges the gap between ancient wisdom and modern science. The mystics who spoke of consciousness as the substance of all things were describing the same reality that quantum physicists are now exploring. The power of assumption that the sages taught is the same observer effect that scientists are measuring in their laboratories. When you realize that your consciousness is literally shaping reality at the quantum level, you begin to understand the awesome responsibility of your assumptions. Every belief you hold, every expectation you maintain, every state of consciousness you inhabit is sending ripples through the quantum field, selecting which possibilities become actualized in your experience. You are not separate from the universe. You are the universe expressing itself as an individual point of consciousness. The same intelligence that governs the movement of galaxies is operating through your imagination. The same creative power that transforms energy into matter is available to transform your assumptions into experience. This is not a matter of belief or faith, but of understanding. When you truly grasp that consciousness and reality are one, that observation creates experience, that your assumptions shape your world, you begin to assume responsibility for your experience. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances and recognize yourself as the creator of circumstances. The quantum bridge reveals that you live in a responsive universe, a universe that mirrors your consciousness, that actualizes your assumptions, that transforms your inner states into outer conditions. Every moment offers a fresh opportunity to observe differently, to assume differently, to collapse the wave function of possibility into the specific reality you prefer. Yet most people remain unaware of their creative power. They move through life unconsciously, allowing their assumptions to be shaped by external circumstances rather than shaping circumstances through conscious assumption. They live as victims rather than creators, prisoners rather than gods. This unconsciousness is not accidental. It is carefully cultivated and maintained by systems of thought and social structures that benefit from human disempowerment. From the moment you're born, you're bombarded with messages designed to make you forget your own creative power. You're taught to see yourself as small, limited, dependent on external authorities for validation and direction. The education system teaches you to memorize rather than imagine, to conform rather than create, to accept limitations rather than transcend them. The media fills your consciousness with images of scarcity, conflict, and fear, conditioning you to expect problems rather than possibilities. Religious institutions often promote the idea that you're separate from divine power, that you must petition external deities rather than recognize the God within your own consciousness. Economic systems are designed to keep you feeling insecure and dependent, always needing more but never quite having enough. Political structures encourage you to see yourself as powerless, needing to be saved by leaders rather than recognizing your own authority. Medical establishments focus on symptoms and problems rather than empowering you to create health through consciousness. All of these systems have one thing in common. They depend on your ignorance of your own creative power. They profit from your assumption of limitation. They thrive when you believe you're at the mercy of forces beyond your control. They maintain their authority by keeping you unconscious of the authority within your own consciousness. This is the propaganda of limitation, a systematic campaign to convince you that you're less than you actually are. It operates not through obvious coercion, but through subtle conditioning. It doesn't tell you directly that you're powerless. Instead, it shapes your assumptions so that you conclude this yourself. It creates a culture where limitation feels normal, where struggle feels necessary, where accepting less than you desire feels realistic. The propaganda is so pervasive that most people don't even recognize it as propaganda. They assume their limiting beliefs are simply facts about reality. They accept scarcity as natural, conflict as inevitable, and powerlessness as realistic. They have been conditioned to see themselves as separate from the creative power of the universe, as dependent on external conditions for their well-being. But propaganda only works when it remains unconscious. The moment you recognize it as propaganda, it begins to lose its power over you. When you realize that your limitations are not facts but assumptions, that your problems are not permanent but changeable, that your circumstances are not fixed but fluid, you begin to reclaim your creative authority. The most effective propaganda operates through repetition and emotion. You're repeatedly exposed to the same limiting messages until they feel true. These messages are delivered with emotional intensity through fear, anger, or desire, so they bypass your rational mind and lodge directly in your subconscious. Over time, these repeated emotional impressions become your assumptions about reality. Television programming, notice the word programming, fills your consciousness with stories of limitation and conflict. News media focuses almost exclusively on problems, creating the impression that the world is dangerous and unpredictable. Advertising creates artificial desires while promoting the assumption that you're incomplete without their products.